All right, guys, in today's video, we're going to get into masquerading in OpenWrt, right? I decided to do this video because I kind of like showing people how to do things in a like the more unconventional ways, right? Because there's a lot of networking. There's a lot of different ways you can achieve like a particular result you want. And I like to use the ones that are like less used just because they're fun. So let's go ahead and get into it, right? So here you can see I have a little diagram here, right? I have three routers, router 1, 2, and 3, right? And then I went ahead and put their little, like, just some temp information here just to work with so we have something to look at, all right? And if you notice, right, I made sure to add the ports that they're connected to because this is going to be important for our masquerading explanation in a little bit, right? So as you can see, router 1 via its WAN port is connected to router 2 in one of its LAN ports, and this is exactly the same for router 3. And of course, router 2 is connected to the World Wide Web, right? So, masquerading, for those of you that I'm sure you probably do, but it's probably helpful to give an explanation, right? Masquerading, long story short, is how the wider web, or to be more specific, anything past the WAN port for a particular router would actually know that the packet belongs to router 1. Okay, so what do I mean by that? Right. If we try to communicate with the internet, right, let's say device 1 connects to is connected to router 1, right, obviously because it's on the same subnet, and it wants to target router 3, right? Well, when router 3 gets that communication or gets that packet, device 1's information is not going to be in that packet from router 1 to router 3. Instead, it's going to be router 1's information, so that when router 3 replies, it's going to reply to router 1's information so that that packet could actually travel to router 1, right? It actually won't see anything as far as, like, the raw packets are. It's not going to see anything about device 1, which is what we're going to kind of talk about today in masquerading. So let's actually go ahead and get started. So made a quick little nifty diagram here to show you, right? So let's say we have device 1 here, right? Which we already established earlier, right, as 1.5. All right. It sends a packet, right? In the packet, we know the packet has the source information for device 1, right? So it belongs to device 1, okay? Its destination, it wants to go to router 3, right? Which is router 3's IP address is going to be 3.1. And of course, because the packet belongs to device 1, we know that it is going to want it to be returned to device 1, okay? So then it makes it to router 1, right? Which is obviously the very first router that is connected to. Now, what happens is masquerading then kicks in, okay? I hereby disguise you on your journey. So masquerading will then change this packet, right? This packet's source information to actually contain router 1's information. So instead of having device 1's information with its MAC address, IP address and whatnot, is actually going to instead have router 1's information. So now the packet belongs to router 1 and the destination is still to router 3. Okay. And remember, this is because of masquerading. And as you know, with like the default OpenWrt routers, right? The WAN port has masquerading enabled. Now, if you look right, and in this particular diagram, as you see, I have these two routers connected to its LAN port, and obviously LAN to LAN, there's no masquerading. So obviously it goes to router 2, and then it just goes immediately to router 3 without any changes, right? So at this point, when router 3 gets that packet, right, it only sees router 1's information. So when it makes that reply, it's going to reply to router 1. So that packet then goes all the way back to router 1. Now, I'm sure you might be wondering, well, how does router 1 know that that particular packet goes back to device 1, right? Because, a router would have many devices, and if multiple devices are trying to connect to the same destination, and all of the source information is being rewritten to router 1, right? That means that all the return packets are going to be the exact same, right? Because router, the destination only saw the source, So that's what it replied to. It didn't, and it won't, doesn't change anything with that respect, right? So what happens? So with masquerading, there's actually a special kind of record conversion, right? And I believe it's like contract list or something along those lines. It's like CONN track something. But basically, right, what the router would actually do is actually keeping tabs on these packet conversions that it does when it overwrites the source information, right? So as you saw, device 1 had the 1.5 IP address, right? And let's say that, in this particular example, if this will stop doing that, okay? In this particular example, right, device 1 wanted to connect to router 3 via its 80 port. Okay, so it went out device 1's 80 port and then, targeted router 3's 80 port, right? Now, in the conversion, what the routers actually do is they'll sit there and they'll select a super random like port number to associate with that device's request. So in this case here, when router 1 got this request and it did masquerading, it rewrote the source information to this, where it gave the router's IP address, but it used a random port number to be the source information, and then sent it again to the same exact destination. So then what actually happens is when router 3 gets that packet, when it makes the reply, it's going to reply to router 1, but is also, right, going to include that specific port number, right? And then that's how router 1 then knows that this particular reply belonged to device 1 at this particular port, because that's what it associated it with, right? Because there's this list going on where it had assigned this port 40,001 to device 1's 80 port. Okay. And so there you go, right? That is how masquerading works. Now, how does this actually look in in real life? So now let's actually go ahead and jump to our routers here. So as you can see here, let me just make sure I get the right tab here, right? So this is going to be router 1, right? And then as you can see, I tried to ping the router that is part of that diagram of router 3, right? And as you can see, I don't get any returns, right? And so my device here, right, also doesn't get any returns. And just a real quick tip too on my Windows users, if you're using a computer with multiple network interfaces, the ping command, if you use the -S, you can actually select which network interface you want to use to send the ping out of. Which can be handy for, like I say, like if you have multiple connections and all those connections could in theory connect to the same device, and you want to make sure that you're using a specific interface, that's how you do it, right? Just FYI. But as you can see, right, like I said, neither my router nor my computer here, and whoa, what's that? Neither my router nor my computer is able to actually ping that router, right? Which, obviously because we didn't allow pinging from that particular source. But let me go ahead and show you now, right? So I think I was using this one as just a test dummy here, right? So let's actually now kind of put this information into practice, right? So as you can see here, I'm going to go ahead and use this random firewall rule here, and let me go ahead and do this, right? So I'm going to allow pings that come from the WAN port, that come from router 1's IP address here, right? Which in this particular example here with my network setup is going to be 4.250 is the IP address, is the WAN port IP address of my router, right? And I'm going to go ahead and then, destination is going to be this device, right? This router, right? So right, what I just did is I just made a firewall rule where router 3 is going to allow pings is going to allow, or basically give response to pings on its WAN port, but only if they come from that specific IP address, which is the IP address that router 1's WAN port has. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and hit save, right? And let's go ahead and apply. All right, and then I don't have to necessarily wait for that, right? So now, as you can see here, right, if I go back to my router 1, if I was to try and ping it, as you can see, I get a response, right? But now the issue is that now let's actually talk about the masquerading part, right? Because I'm sure, like, as I was going through that, he's like, well, hold on, what does any of this have to do with masquerading? Okay, remember what I said, right? Masquerading will modify any of those packets to be, right, to their source information to be router 1's. So what will end up happening now is that even though I intended to make it so that only router 1, right, I only wanted router 1 to be able to ping this router, I just inadvertently made every device that router is connected to able to ping this router, which you'll be able to see if I sit here now and I try to ping the that same router. As you can see, I get responses, right? And that's what we obviously don't want to happen, right? So what do we do? Okay, so let me first go ahead and let me just disable this real fast here. And let's go ahead and let's jump onto our downstream router, which as you see, I already had one from testing earlier. Okay. So what I'm going to do is, if you on OpenWrt, you can go to OpenWrt network firewall, and then you go to your NAT rules, right? NAT rules is how you get to fine tune those writes to be able to allow specific devices to not have their source information written, right? And again, right, so you don't have to do it this way, right? A lot of people, what they'll just do, especially with this particular setup where it's all internal, a lot of times what people will just do is they'll just either make the WAN port just act as a LAN port, or they'll just add the WAN port to the firewall. So it does look, or they'll just disable masquerading, right? So you can either disable masquerading, right? So obviously that would fix your problem. You could for your LAN zone, you could actually just add your WAN port, right? And then you just delete the actual you don't have to delete it, but you don't need your WAN specific firewall zone anymore necessarily, right? Or you can go to your default bridge that has all your LAN ports and just add your WAN port, and then boom, right? That also achieves the same thing. Like I said, there's a bunch of different ways that a lot of people do it. I'm just showing you that if you wanted to work with this particular scenario where you had to keep your WAN port as it was with masquerading on, this is what you would do, right? So let's go ahead and let's jump to NAT rules real quick. And I'm just going to say my demo. Sorry, let me hit demo. All right. If I want that specific, but I don't care about any of this right now. Just ICMP, right? Outbound zone, right? So obviously we know that we're trying to communicate with a device that is on the outside of the WAN port, right? And obviously, right, because that's where masquerading is happening anyway. And so now let's actually change the source address. So the source address, right, is going to be the IP address that the device that you want to make masquerading not apply for, right? Which in this case, for my device here, it is the 192.168.3.3. So let's go ahead and add that here. Okay, so here's the source address. And so now if I go ahead and set the destination, now I could give it the specific IP address for router 3, but if I also want it to be able to be able to do this for any device on router 3, I can give it its subnet, which looks like this here, right? So the subnet, which .0, and then of course your CIDR notation here. And what I'm going to do is I am going to change the action to accept, which as you can see, it says disable address rewriting. Okay. So I'm going to go ahead and hit save. And now let's go ahead and apply it. And now what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to come back over here and I'm going to change this. I'm going to change this to the computer's IP address. And I'm going to go ahead and hit save, enable that, right? And then hit apply. Now let's go ahead and let's test this out. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and let's try to ping the that router, right? Shouldn't get no replies. We didn't get any replies. Now for us, all right, so we see that ping worked. So now what we're going to go ahead and do, right, is I'm going to go ahead and disable it just so you guys can see. Make sure you guys see that it is indeed the masquerading. Now, here's the thing. OpenWrt, I don't know if maybe it's just because I have these snapshots and they like to be crazy buggy. Now, I just disabled this, so this is not supposed to work. If it does, I just need to I have to reboot my router. Okay, cool. So it didn't work, right? So as you can see, right, it didn't work. And, you know, we still have this particular IP address still allowed to ping. So, you know, there we go. So there you go. So that's it. So I hope that this helps. And okay, yeah, cool. See, so here go the example. So this is just, you know, FYI, right? As you can see, I did re-enable it again, and if I sit here and hit enter, it still complains that it's unreachable. So now I'm going to have to like I said, that might just be a me problem with using this particular snapshot. So just FYI. But yeah, right. So as you guys saw, right, I just showed you how to make a caveat NAT rule, basically, where you can allow specific devices to not have their packet source information changed by the router, so that way when it makes it to you know, the essentially like the router 3 here, or the next hop, if you want, you know, if you want to call it that, router 3 actually know what specific device via its IP address that came from. I wasn't able to just get it to work with MAC addresses, so IP addresses was the only thing as far as I could see what OpenWrt was able to do. But you know, this still works. So I hope this helped anybody that might needed to understand like what masquerading was, as well as how to kind of establish that connection in this very specific way when you have a router using masquerading, that you can't you know, if you want to do it this way, maybe through limitation or something, why you can't just put it on the same like LAN firewall port thing on mobile. So all those different alternatives that I showed you. Let me just make sure that this, okay, cool. This did reboot, and I bet you, yeah, see, and now it works. All right. So just FYI for those of you doing it. But that's it. So you guys take care. Bye.